District Secretary Nancy Bianco Hatfield, and this is Tuesday, March 3rd, 2015. This is a regular meeting of the Dublin-San Ramon Services District Board of Directors. Presiding this evening is President Ed Duarte.
Thank you, Nancy. We've already had the salute to the flag, but we need another roll call.
Director Vaughn here. Director Benson.
Here.
Director Hopkins.
Here.
Vice President Howard.
Here.
President Duarte.
Here.
Thank you.
Special announcement activities.
Nothing in that category tonight.
Okay. Public comment. This time, we invite anyone in the audience to come up and speak on any item that is not on our agenda. No takers. Okay. And we'll go into item 6, reports.
I think we need to read something.
There's because of the two meetings successively, there's an announcement that the Brown Act suggests that we make.
Sorry about that. A special meeting of the Dublin-San Ramon Services Board of Directors was held at 5:30 today, March 3rd. The Board of Directors of Dublin-San Ramon Services District Health, Directors Halkett, Von Peter Leopold, Vice President Howard, and myself attended this special board meeting. Director Benson did not attend today's special meeting because of having to recuse himself. Pursuant to the Government Code, Section 54952.3, no director will receive any compensation or stipend for participating in more than one meeting on this date, as specified in our district policy P100-14-2, day of service. I understand that Director Benson would like to make a statement regarding today's special meeting.
I did not attend any portion of the DSRSD special meeting that I understand commenced at 5:30 p.m. today to avoid any participation in any discussions, decisions, or voting on any potential DSRSD water supply contract with EB Mud, to make sure that I neither influence nor attempt to influence another member of the DSRSD board regarding any matters pertinent to the contract consistent with applicable provisions of the government code, because I am a salaried employee of East Bay Mud, nor did I receive or review any of the agenda materials pertaining to the special meeting.
Number 6 reports. Okay.
Yes, President Duarte, members of the board, I'll be pretty brief tonight. On March 25th, which is coming up here later this month, the Dublin Chamber of Commerce will be holding their State of the City luncheon, and newly elected Dublin Mayor will be speaking at that. And for Director Duarte, I apologize that we were unable to make that announcement about the City of San Ramon State of the City address. You know, the City of San Ramon Chamber now communicates exclusively via email, and they did not have our email, so we just never got the announcement that State of the City address was already held. So we've since contacted them, we've corrected that, and hopefully we'll be in touch. Because I enjoyed the meeting last year with them, so hopefully we'll be in touch with that going forward. And then lastly, on Monday, I actually should say Tuesday, May 5th through Friday, May 9th, the Association of California Water Agency will be holding their semi-annual conference in Sacramento. So it's very easy to get there for a day or for the whole conference as you may allow. The agenda has not been posted, but if anybody's interested, I kind of understand the way the conference will run, so if anybody needs to make a decision about a particular dates, let me know. But please let Nancy or I know if you intend to attend so we can make the appropriate reservations for the conference. It's an easy conference to get to. There's been no correspondence to or from the board on any item certainly on this agenda, and as you know for the record, in the reference that we received a letter from Joe Taylor, General Manager of Zone 7, related to matters on the last agenda discussion. And that's all I have.
Committee reports. We have on record the lessons of the leaders.
The special meeting of the 20th.
And there was also a Durable meeting on last week.
Yeah. I was going to report that in DM. Do you want to?
No, I was just going to mention that it's
We had lava too.
Yeah.
But,
Derwin met on February 23rd, and actually the only thing that was on the agenda was the election of the board and the board chair and the board vice chair, and unfortunately, both of them were absent. So we had to put it off until our April meeting.
And an alternate is not a current chair.
Yeah.
So noted.
That's why you nominated me last time.
Okay. Approval of the minutes for our special meeting of February 17 and our regular minutes of February 17.
I'll move for approval of the special meeting of the 17th and, in one motion, the regular meeting of the 17th.
I'll second.
We moved and seconded to approve the minutes of both special and regular board meetings on February 17. Questions, comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Moving on to the consent calendar. Items 8A, B, C, and D. Anyone plan on pulling any of those items?
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the consent calendar, items 8A, B, C, and D. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Item 9A, board business.
Yes, President Duarte, members of the board, this is a standing item on all board meetings during the state and community drought emergency. It allows the community to talk about the district's drought management plan, give you feedback, and it also allows the board to discuss how these things are going and give staff any direction. I would note that obviously we took a couple of important steps this evening with regard to the drought management plan, because it was that drought management plan that directed the district to go out and try to put together the transfer, so we're well underway with that. But also, in the last couple of days, the Department of Water Resources revised their delivery allocation to 20%. The good news, it went up from 15 to 20%. The bad news is 20% is still the second lowest delivery allocation in the history of the state project. Today, the Department of Water Resources conducted their third snow survey. They found a little bit, I was told, on the north side of the tree, north side of the hill. Basically, the snowpack is at 5% of normal, so it was not a really good situation. And furthermore, the 20% allocation is based on storage at San Luis Reservoir down near Los Banos, which is south of the Delta, which we learned last year that the state project pumps stopped running, and Los Banos is essentially split into semi-tropic, and the water can't be returned back. Certainly benefits current and Pollock and places like that, but it's possible it may not help us. So we think, despite what we're hearing from Zone 7, the jury is still out for this water year, and we think the situation is still particularly important.
I think we're all in agreement with that, the direction we're going to continue with our policy.
So with the risk of sounding snarky, given the recent correspondence we received, should we consider this canceling this whole drought thing? I mean, someone could.
If that's your pleasure, we will again.
I mean, the experts have weighed in, so.
How many districts, how many people are affected by moving water south of where you want it to go eventually, and they can't get it back? Is that just a Zone 7, or is this
It's really, let's talk about the contractors. There are 4, maybe 5 contractors that are north of the Delta contractors. They're not affected at all. In fact, they're in a really nice place. In fact, this diversion we're having through East Bay, North's Freeport facility, really is a north of Delta diversion, not a state water project, a Yuma project water. So it's a good thing it's not crossing the Delta. Alameda County Water District is in the same situation as Zone 7 is, because they're in South Bay Aqueduct, and to a lesser extent, but not completely so is Santa Clara Valley Water District. They're in the South Bay Aqueduct, and they have a backdoor in from Los Banos because they're also a CDP contractor, so they have a pipeline coming in from the south side of their service area. Everybody else, there may be one or two contractors that are on the way between Harvey Banks and the Los Manos, or the San Luis facility, but I can't think of those at the moment. Most of it, if you put the water in San Luis, most state contractors do that. Not ones, but most except
Except for a few, which we are one.
Yeah.
So it's not very cost effective for us to stick a pipe down the center of the canal.
Item 9B, receive debt disclosure sheet. John?
President Duarte, you may remember back on December 16th of last year, you adopted a debt disclosure policy as a result of the recent municipalities continuing disclosure cooperative initiative. It's a mouthful. As part of that policy, we have adopted, we said we would have training for all board members on requirements of debt disclosure. This evening, Chris Lynch of Bond Counsel with Jones Hall is here, and he will lead us through that training. Chris?
Good evening, Mr. President, members of the board. Can you hear me well? Great. I'm Chris Lynch. I work at a law firm called Jones Hall, and we have been bond counsel to the district for quite a few years, along with my partner, Bill Madison, who's now retired. I specialize in helping issuers comply with federal securities laws. John asked me to come speak with you today in order to describe how the federal securities laws apply to issuers of municipal bonds and to describe how an issuer should comply with those laws. My message in a nutshell will be first, federal securities laws apply to issuers of municipal bonds when they issue bonds. There's an initial disclosure requirement. And then there's a continuing disclosure requirement that applies thereafter. Second, district staff and elected officials should take reasonable steps to make sure that any disclosure by the district complies with those federal securities laws. And third, district staff and elected officials risk personal liability if the district doesn't comply with those laws. So it makes sense to understand your obligations. I'm not sure. We'll wait 20 minutes.
Well, that's good.
That's right.
Was that you or was that me?
Let's see, maybe me. I would like to go back to that first slide. How would I like you to control it?
Is that it?
One more back, one more. Okay. Both of the laws that I will describe today were adopted by the United States Congress after the Great Depression, in which there was widespread securities fraud that adversely affected investors. We'll change the slide if you don't mind. The first law that I'd like to talk about is the Securities Act of 1933. It was the first general federal law to ever regulate securities, and it generally requires registration of securities. But in 1933, out of respect for the other governmental entities within the United States of America, the Congress exempted from registration any municipal securities. So municipal securities are not subject to registration. The second part of the 33 Act, however, prohibits fraud in the issuance of securities, and as you'd expect, your securities are not exempt from that prohibition on fraud. Okay. The second law is the Securities Act of 1934, and that act applies to issuers and underwriters of municipal bonds, and it regulates the transmission of information related to federal securities. The 34 Act created the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is the SEC, which is the chief regulatory body over securities in the United States, and I'll be talking about the SEC a little bit more. Most importantly, the 34 Act regulates fraud. Under authority given to it by the 34 Act, the SEC adopted Rule 10b-5, and Rule 10b-5 requires communications to investors to include all material facts and not to misstate any material facts. So what is a material fact? A material fact is a fact that there's a substantial likelihood that under all of the circumstances, that fact would have actual significance in the decision of the investor to buy or sell a particular security. In 1989, following a $1 billion default by the Washington Public Power System, and on the heels of New York's own financial problems related to its bonds, the SEC concluded that investors had not been told all of the information that they should be told related to these two defaults, and it adopted SEC Rule 15C212. Rule 15C212 requires an issuer of bonds to prepare a disclosure document, what's called an official statement, that has to include a number of elements. And I show here an example of your 2011 official statement related to your bonds. The document is prepared by the issuer's staff with the assistance of professionals such as bond counsel. It's approved by the issuer's legislative body, so when bonds were issued in 2011, we approved the disclosure document. And it must include all material facts, specifically the terms of the bonds and financial and operating data relevant to the decision to buy the bonds. In 1994, the SEC adopted amendments to Rule 15C212 that established a new continuing disclosure regime. Up until 1994, issuers of municipal bonds did not have to provide ongoing disclosure to investors, even though the bonds lasted for 30 years. The amendments require issuers to annually update the financial information and operating data that was included in the original disclosure document, the official statement, to provide timely notice of certain significant events such as bond defaults or rating changes, and to post those continuing disclosure filings on a publicly available website hosted by the Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board, or the MSR. So to help you understand what the SEC finds objectionable in certain municipal issuers, I want to highlight a few situations in which issuers got it wrong. In Orange County, California, the county failed to disclose a risky investment scheme that led to its bankruptcy. In Maricopa County, Arizona, the county failed to disclose to investors material declines in its financial condition and operating cash flow. In the city of Syracuse, New York, the city falsely claimed a surplus in certain of its funds, including its debt service funds, and materially misstated ending fund balances and described certain unaudited financial statements as audited financial statements. I know some of these are hard to believe. In the city of Miami, Florida, who's now gone through 2 cease and desist proceedings with the Securities Exchange Commission, the city failed to disclose to investors cash flow shortages, and the city attempted to hide those by using bond proceeds to pay operating expenses. With the Massachusetts Turnpike Authority, the authority failed to disclose to investors substantial cost overruns with the Big Big project. And in the city of San Diego, California, and the state of New Jersey, they failed to disclose to investors the city's, or in that case the state's, looming pension fund crisis. And pension and OPEBs are big issues for the SEC. Big issues for the SEC.
Did any of those did any of those pierce all the way to the legislative body and people got punished?
I'm going to talk about that actually. But all of those are actual enforcement actions that resulted in an order by the SEC. So with that background, I'm here today to help you understand what the SEC says municipal issuers should do in the context of municipal finance. In a position paper written by the SEC's Division of Enforcement had the 5 lessons we put out. First, issuers should adopt written policies and procedures. In each of the most recent enforcement actions against the municipal issuers I just talked about, the SEC required the adoption of written policies and procedures. At John's urging, you previously approved written policies and procedures that we believe are consistent with best practices. I also want to point out that your policies highlight that the disclosure that is governed by federal securities law is not limited to your initial disclosure document, your continuing disclosure document, or even your audited financial statements. It also includes information that is reasonably likely to reach the municipal securities marketplace and trading markets, which could include a state of the city address, it could include press releases, and it could include your website. In 2013, the SEC brought an enforcement action against the city of Harrisburg, and in that action, the SEC's theory was that because the city had not filed its continuing disclosure filings on time as required to do, investors reasonably relied on misleading information on the city's website. Second, issuers should provide appropriate training to their officials and elected officials and the staff. Anyone involved in the issuance of bonds should receive training on how the securities laws work, and that's what we're here tonight to do. Third, local agencies should focus in their disclosure on the big picture. In San Diego, for example, there's a lot of details about how the city's finances work, but they never mentioned this looming 800-pound gorilla, their pension underfunding. And that required constant attention by the city council during its budget discussions, but they didn't mention it in the rating agency presentations or even their audited financial statements. Fourth, local agencies should disclose good facts with bad facts. It's very tempting to treat your initial disclosure document as a marketing piece, but you shouldn't. You should describe the good facts and the bad facts, works all. For many issuers, the big picture may have something to do with pensions and OPEBs these days, but not in every case. It could be litigation. It could be the fact that one of your largest ratepayers is moving out of the district. It could be deferred public infrastructure work. It could be a structural imbalance in your budget. And finally, the SEC thinks that local agencies should hire auditors and other consultants that are suited for the tasks they're being hired to perform. In other words, hire competent professionals to help. So let me answer the question you just asked. First, are district board members required to read disclosure documents word for word? And if so, or even if not, what is the potential liability faced by district board members? So first, the SEC has made it clear that if you are part of the approval process for disclosure documents, whether an initial disclosure document or an audited financial statement, that you may not need to read it word for word, but you should make sure that any material facts that you're aware of that could impact the district's ability to take up service on the bonds is included in that disclosure document. Ask questions of staff, ask questions of your hired professionals, but make sure that the information that you know about is included in the disclosure document. Secondly, the answer to whether there's personal liability is yes, although it seems to be limited to those circumstances in which public officials act very, very badly. In Orange County, the SEC thought that 2 individuals were responsible for the fraud joint activity of the county, and each received a jail sentence and a fine, even though the SEC concluded that neither had benefited personally from their activities with respect to the county. In San Diego, the SEC filed securities charges against a wide scope of city officials, the city manager, the auditor controller, the deputy city manager for finance, the assistant auditor and controller, and the city treasurer. And it ultimately announced that 3 individuals would pay $25,000 fines, and a 4th would pay a $5,000 fine, and each in their consent agreement was prohibited from seeking reimbursement from insurers or from the city. And finally, in 2014, the SEC brought charges against a former city administrator and a former mayor in a city in Michigan. And they concluded that the mayor was responsible for the activities of district staff because the mayor was a strong proponent of a bond financing for a new movie studio in the city of Michigan. And the mayor agreed to pay a $10,000 fine. So with that cheerful but instructive conclusion, I'll just repeat the 3 points I made earlier and answer any questions you have. First, federal securities law applies to initial disclosure for bonds, continuous disclosure, but also anything that you say that is intended to reach the investor marketplace. Second, elected officials and public agency employees should take reasonable steps to ensure that your disclosure documents include all material facts. And again, that could be your audit, that could be your website, whatever is intended to reach investors. And third, you risk personal liability, so make sure you are aware of the law and you take your obligations seriously. I'd be happy to answer questions.
You hear so many stories often of elected officials claiming, I didn't know, I didn't understand the report, I didn't see that, et cetera, et cetera. And it's pretty clear that that doesn't excuse any reprimand and legal action against you. So I guess the watchword is simply pay attention, talk to staff, talk to you, and make sure we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's.
That's right. I think it's fair to say that, those same rules that govern Google when it issues bonds or issues stock, they govern DSRSD bonds. For many years, there was no continuing disclosure. Most issuers didn't pay careful attention to what they were saying in the marketplace. And the initiative that John mentioned earlier from December, that is probably one of the first steps that the SEC is taking to make sure that everybody understands that we expect you to behave responsibly when you sell your securities. So the municipal bond market's huge. There's hundreds of billions of dollars out there. They're very concerned that investors are taking greater risks with those bonds than they are with corporate securities.
So how, the notification is basically making public our audit reports and then putting that kind of information on our website. Is there things that we have to file with agencies, the SEC, or anything?
So as of today, I don't know if the SEC is happy with this, but right now the SEC is barred from requiring registration of your securities. There's a provision in U.S. law that prevents the SEC from regulating the issuance of securities. These rules that I've described, Rule 10b-5 and Rule 15c-12, well, they're imposed on underwriters because that's the only way that SEC has control over the municipal market. And so all of the things that issuers are required to do related to their interactions with underwriters of bonds. So your initial disclosure document, which has to be distributed by the underwriter, has to include material facts. Your continuing disclosure, which has to be filed with the MSRB, has to update the information you included in your official statement. It has to include notice of certain events, 14 specific events. And then anything else that a reasonable investor would want to know in order to take that information you've given it and understand the risks associated with your bonds. But that's it. You have very limited obligations, initial and continuing disclosure. If you do that, then you'll be in compliance with the law.
But maybe one example might be, if we hadn't had drought rates on the books, and we were locked in on our rates and couldn't change the rates given the drought, the disclosure requirements may not list that specifically, but it would have a severe impact
The impact
on our
of
working
that-
capital. We'd have to file a statement that would go online at the one reporting agency, so everybody gets it at the same time.
Right, but what's important to know about that is you don't, let's assume that you realize that on March 15th, 2016, oh, we got a problem. You're not obligated to file that on March 2nd, 2016. It's the next time you speak to the marketplace. So if you have an annual report that's due on April 1st, when you make that filing, it has to include all material facts. We don't have this rolling obligation to let investors know everything that's going on within the district. Just when you tell them things, tell them everything.
Okay, so first we make the official filing, and then it goes on websites.
Exactly.
And so the annual financials, Karen actually uploads them to a website so that everybody gets them and has access to them at the same time.
So it's not as rigorous as, say, the stock market where.
You don't have quarterly filings or something.
Or the 4 Bs and the 72 hour, yeah, all right.
10Ks, 10Qs, you don't have that requirement.
Yeah.
Well, I think the SEC would like it, but the reality is, local agencies don't have the resources.
Yeah, I mean, some of that guys could probably pull it off, but that'd be really burdensome for a lot of agencies. I know it'd be burdensome for you too.
Any other questions or comments?
That was really clear. That's about as clear as I've seen SEC. Explained.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, President Markey and members of the board, this is the next step in our strategic planning process, and we've been taking steps through this since the beginning of the year. The board has discussed the district's mission, the district's vision statement, and the district's core values. None of those decisions have been formally made. Everything will be wrapped together in May. And so there's opportunities as we go through this process. For example, we talk about the goals, and you say, well, this doesn't inform quite the mission statement. We can always double back, so it's a little bit of an iterative process. So I don't want you to think that as we're going through this, you're forever committed, that you don't have an opportunity to review everything again. But one of the things, so today we're going to be looking at strategic goals. These are things that, these are not to-do list things. These, tasks to be done. Those are part of the business plan of the district. Those will be the next step we talk about. These are sort of observable or measurable outcomes that you want to see in the district over the course of the strategic plan over the next 5 years. And now one of the things before we get into them, and I presented them here in the document, along with the mission, vision, and value statements you've already gone over. This is the 5th edition of the strategic plan. Each edition has a 2-year life. So we're having a strategic plan in essentially its current structure for 8 years. We're looking at years 9 and 10 here. And like anything that's been around a while in a bureaucracy, it has a tendency to grow. Things that we put in goals, and we put in goals, the goals never quite seem to go away. They go into the next phase of things. So this thing has really gotten a little bit of a multi-headed monster to keep track of it. I put some stats on the front of it. We now have 57 goals. Frankly, I don't know how one person would. Not that one person would. We're proposing 22, and we'll go into those. And I don't think 22 is necessarily a magic number, either on the high side or the low side. But really, what I want to do with your cooperation, this cycle of strategic planning, is really turn the corner around this, and stop expanding everything and putting things in there, and really kind of focus on really what are those goals that are at a strategic level that we want to achieve. It's not to say we're going to stop doing big stuff like filing and debt disclosures, but those are part of the district's business as usual, just continuing to do those. We don't need to raise those to a strategic level. If, for example, we just got whacked by the FCC for not having proper disclosures, then by all means, that would be a strategic goal to kind of get that in order. But I hope you can see the difference between the two. So we're really trying to turn the corner and bring it together. So Dan, if you can give me the keyboard and the mouse, I'll lead you through. We've also had the goals organized into, we call them elements, into 7 elements. And that's gotten a little bit unwieldy as well.
There you go.
This one? Okay. No, that's the vision. We're looking for the goals. Okay. So we have 7 elements right now. I'm proposing to sort of boil those down to 4 elements, basically aligning with the way the board organized itself in terms of your committees. There's a financial affairs element, and we think we can package a lot of the goals into that category. There's a technical affairs element, which is operations as well as engineering. There's an external affairs element, which is dealing with the public, our customers, and legal agencies, etc. And then there's personnel, which I thought was important enough to raise to its own life. So we're proposing to boil these down from 7 to 4. So effectively, what we leave off, we left off partnerships. Partnerships, I think, are really a tool to an end, not a goal themselves. So a lot of things we get out of partnerships, we found homes for here. We've combined infrastructure, water resources, wastewater resources, and recycled water resources into one goal called partnerships. And I think that's just a better structure, it's easier to understand. So, unless anybody has any objections to that, nothing magical, we just move these things around. That'd be my recommendation, is to stay with those. I think we can find a home for just about everything in this district. Thoughts, comments? Okay, so let's go to the top, financial affairs. There's 2 parts to the goal. One of them is a goal statement. Really, and we can wordsmith here. These are words that staff, my full management team, and I kind of put together to keep the discussion going. So if one word doesn't resonate or sounds hokey, you've got a better word, by all means, let us know. But there's also a part of the goal office right-hand column, which is a reflection of the board's importance and timing of the board. Perhaps that's really the more important thing that we as staff like to think about. How important is it? We divide these into 3 categories: mission critical, important, and best practice. And then when is the goal to be started and when is it to be completed? And we just simply said near term, mid-term, long-term, or goal is going on, or achieving the goal of that year is completing this goal. And really what that does is, what near term means is the first 2 years of the strategic plan, because that'll fit into the project. Okay. Midterm means the next 2 to 3 years of the 5-year strategic plan for achievement of the goal or starting the goal. That goes in, that's important, but that's a little bit further down the road. And long-term means, we're going to start this goal here, but probably, it's a big enough goal, we're not going to complete it in the time frame of this strategic plan. It'll continue on, as we kind of move forward. So really, for us, some of the most important input would be your sense of those priorities, because anything that you put in a near-term goal, we're going to be looking to, make sure we have enough resources in the budget several buildings. So that's a really important part. So does that make sense, those categories? Okay. So financial affairs, I think I'm sorry for the presentation, I wish I could be a little smaller, but it's compromise between the font size and scrolling up and down. We really proposed 5 goals. We boiled everything down financially and we got 5 goals. So really at a strategic level, I don't think we're going to forget about anything, but these are 5 goals. In your board agenda packet, there's some detail below that are getting to the tasks that we're going to do. Right here, I'm just focusing on goals. So the first one is ensuring appropriate investment and sound financial planning to support the district's mission well ahead of need. Sounds like a business as usual thing, but we're beginning to look at the need for some big expenditures in our capital budget, as you'll see as that's coming together. So I think this is going to be an important goal for us. Let me go through all 5 of the financial goals, and you can add more to them and tell me if one of them doesn't make sense, we can talk them on that. Satisfy pension and OPEB obligations. OPEBs are post-employment benefits within 5 years. I think we're there essentially on the OPEB obligations. We have tough hill to climb as you heard last board meeting, 2 board meetings ago with regards to pension obligation. I think it's a solvable problem with a little bit of discipline, but it's not something that's just going to happen without some attention paid to it. As you heard from Chris earlier, that's pretty material. Satisfy the residual amount of the temporary infrastructure charge obligation. We asked our ratepayers during the recession to contribute nearly $8 million towards money that otherwise would have been paid from capital charges, from connection fee charges. We're gradually trying to pay that back. We've paid down about half of that, like $4 million, and still have about $4 million in the books. You actually have a policy as to how we're going to continue to pay that back, but I think it's important that we continue to have that as a goal here. Using asset management-driven data, or asset management-driven, data-driven approach for setting replacement reserve targets. If you really get into the math of how we set replacement reserves, we get into an Excel term, we actually kind of have a bit of a circular reference in there. It works, but it's just a little, it's not the best. We can do better with that. I think we need to push it more. Better link our infrastructure condition assessments with our financial plan. That's really important. And then integrating master plans with fee setting for capacity limits. You have authorized water system master plan, a water resources master plan, a wastewater master plan, each of which is going to spit out a series of projects. You don't know it, but we're also doing a facilities master plan. This is looking at the courtyard, and that's nice. So one of the things we really need to do is, it's great to have those master plans, how to spend the money. The engineers here love to spend money on stuff like that. But we really need to make sure that the revenue side of things makes sense as well, and sort of guide those into fee setting as well. So those are what we kind of thought is the key strategic financial goals to be faced. You may think there's other ones, or maybe you don't like these, or you want to modify them, so let me know.
Good.
It's a reasonable scope. We've scope created this document for the years.
Yeah. And I also, thank you all for your beginning on it, but a lot of that is really helpful as a lot of you said 102, for example, but you said it in different words, You said that if we tried to package things together, so you may not recognize your words here, but hopefully you'll recognize them. That's good. Do you like one? Okay. So there's 5 of these. I think that's a pretty manageable number for finance. Now we're going to get into technical affairs, and I think there's like 10 or 11 of them. And you might say, well, gosh, there's a lot of them. But if you really think about it, we are a technical organization, operations and engineering. So it's no surprise that there's more technical goals than perhaps our financial goals or certain affairs goals. So let me go through those. This is number 1, 2.1. Increase the reliability of the water supply by diversifying the water supply portfolio. I'd like to eventually build some measurements into that goal. But we're not at the point tonight to be able to do that. That's part of the work that RC brainstormed with you last time. We're going to see how that turns out. But eventually, I think that goal needs to be a little more numerically specific. So I tossed out a few things that I think are in line with what you told us a couple of meetings ago. I think the real goal is increasing the reliability of the water supply by diversifying it. I think that's critical. If you ask me, I think everything is important. I think that might be the single most important strategic issue facing this district at this point. Number 2, and this kind of goes hand in hand, but it's, one is the supply, one is the demand, just like, revenue and expenses. Managing potable water. Thank you, Georgie. You made an important comment last time. goals that we need to, when we talk about water use goals, you know, we need to put about total goals to do something. So manage potable water demand while meeting the state mandates for water usage. Now, you know, eventually we may plug in some numbers in there, you know, I don't know what the numbers are, we talked around last time, I think that really should be, you know, should evolve to that eventually, we'll see how far we get, but I think it's important to continue to manage our demand. I say that because a lot of the things we're doing, we're thinking about, you know, we're talking about indirect potable reuse. We are never going to get to that end without doing everything we possibly can to demand management first. So I think this is sort of a foundational role for the first one. 3, participate in the implementation of recycled water deliveries to the city of Pleasanton service area. That's important. We just signed a major contract with Pleasanton about 12 months ago. We're going to be going forward with that this summer. A lot of work to be done. There's a few, it's such a complex agreement that we already know there's a couple of amendments that we need to make to the agreement as we move forward. I think that's an important strategic goal for the district to focus on. As I said before, drop old recycled water replacing it out, that's everything. 204, define and implement essential projects in a timely manner to meet community services expectations, rather than trying to pick out, you know, let's build an anaerobic digester, let's build a, you know, a new pipeline. The standard we want here is not to identify a given project, but not to let the absence of the project hold up service to the community. That's what the goal says. The tasks underneath there will say, you know, build a new anaerobic digester, build a you know, nutrient removal facility, build a new water reservoir, etc. But the goal, the outcome is don't let infrastructure, lack of infrastructure, hold up something the community wants to do for service. Next one, define and implement essential projects. Next one, 5. Use asset management to improve maintenance efficiency, just like we're driving the asset management into finance. We also want to drive it into maintenance. We're doing that very well. I think we can do better. We're doing it very well in the collection system. We need to push it into the water system and into the wastewater treatment. Diversify management of biosolids. We have a single point, you know, we have a single point of failure on the water supply last year. One of these years, I guarantee it that the district will learn we have a single point of failure in biosolids. That's what we need to get ahead of that. We're making good progress, by the way. At some point, we're going to biosolids management program is making some good progress. So I think that's a good one. Plan for nutrient control. You heard a little bit about this from Dan Gallagher. Thank you for that last time. You know, nitrogen and phosphorus removal, one of the days going to be a huge issue going forward. Hopefully everybody will ease their way. I don't want you to think it's going to be a crisis, but we need to participate in that. The active participants, 10 to 15 years, there's very likely to be some significant investments being asked of all those uses. Enhance our capability to respond to and recover from emergencies. We have got to recover from emergencies. You know, we do a good job of, you know, finding, stashing away supplies and other materials and stuff. I'm a little bit concerned that we're not ready and trained to recover from that emergency as quickly as we should. And so I kind of built that in there just as a focus for the organization to be able to recover, provide service, maintain, you know, make sure we can recover from the computer. An emergency doesn't necessarily mean an earthquake. It can mean, you know, a cyber attack. Make sure we can recover from something like that. I think we need to focus on that as an organization. I'm not quite sure what some of the details are.
Like business continuity.
It's a business continuity. Implement secure information technology platform, focus on security. This is, you know, focusing on, you know, the cyber attacks and CSRMA training at El Paso last month. It was absolutely, you know, what's going on. And, you know, it was ironic. We were getting this training from CASA, CSRMA, and our website, our host got attacked and was down for a couple of days through the denial of service. So these things are happening. And it's an emerging issue that can be last one, a technical deliver a water of the quality that meets all standards and is acceptable to our customers. That one is a longer term goal. I labeled it as mission critical because of meeting all standards. We absolutely have to meet those standards. The aesthetic, being acceptable to our customers is obviously maybe less for that. It's not a mission critical. So I chose to characterize it as mission critical because of the meeting standards. And there's a long effort. It's not cheap, and we kind of put that weight on the back burner because of drought. But it's still an issue. So that's the technical. Thoughts, comments, want to go back in? I can make mentions. Add anything? Did we miss it?
2.03, I know right now we're doing more composite than recycled. Do we need to limit to that? Is there any other parts of the valley that you can?
No. I mean, no, we don't need to.
Or we could be more inclusive, I mean, maybe the eastern side of Livermore, maybe the western side of Livermore is easier to partner with us than trying to get it for, actually cancel that.
We could generalize that and say the city, the cities in the tri-valley.
Any couple of water, yeah, anything we can use.
City.
I wonder if someday we'll need to manage recycled water. It'll come down eventually, but maybe we don't have to worry about it.
It's not like a resource.
Yeah.
People, they flush their water, so it's.
Yeah, I mean, greatness could fully utilize it.
And then we're gonna get a briefing on the biosolids soon. But frankly, I think, well, water, water's one, and ironically, this biosolids is like one B in it, because.
Yeah, it's a little further out there. It's not quite as in your face as water is.
What scares me about it is, it's one letter from a crazy regulator away from creating a real process.
The one groundwater sample that has some bad chemical, whether it's connected to our
Or not.
site or not.
Yeah. A little distance. And I know it's expensive, but, it's.
We'll schedule a briefing for you, but I think some of that's coming out of the some of that's coming out of the wastewater master plan, but certainly we can brief you on what's going on with biosolids, near biosolids.
Because I know we had some, like 5 or 6 years ago, we had our own, we were talking about dewatering, we were actually looking at where to put it, and, we kind of started that path and then stopped.
Well, we got involved in the BAB2E, that's a code for biosolids energy. There's 19 agencies in that, so it takes a long time to get move forward, but it's beginning to move
Good.
forward very
And
positively.
if we spread the cost over 19 agencies, that's, otherwise, the list is thorough.
Yeah. Okay, so one change was generalized Pleasanton to cities in the south. Okay, then we get into external affairs, customers, other cities, everybody. Govern in an effective, efficient, open, and transparent manner. Seek new ways to improve the institutional way we deliver services. Ensure the public is aware of and understands important issues facing the district as public outreach. Without saying underneath there, there'll be a task. They'll say drought. They'll say biosolids energy. They'll say school. Education. This is the overarching. Expand the use of technology to provide enhanced customer service to all district. I mean, the poster child for that's been Aquahawk, obviously. Push out a little bit. Implement needed changes to records management, retention, and retrieval policies and systems, including electronic records. Believe me, that may sound very mundane. Boy, that's important, and we are hurting. We need to move forward with that.
Sounds like a project.
Yeah, no,
Well, it is a project.
Oh, yeah, these aren't projects, these are goals.
It's a huge project.
Yeah, you could, Rich, to your point, you could interpret this, we could, as part of governing an efficient open.
It's fine. Surface, that's fine.
I think it's important enough to make it a separate item.
Yeah, and you're right, that, you know, there's always a little bit of judgment, whether it's a project or and then in personnel, just a couple of things. Maintain fair and equitable labor agreements with competitive salary and benefit packages. As you know, all of our MOUs are coming up in the next couple of years as the 5-year plan, so I think we really need to have that in there. Plus, a lot of things have changed since our last MOUs coming out of the recession, pension reform, all these things, you know, the Affordable Care Act. So there's a lot of issues that are going to be addressed in the next couple of years. And then lastly, develop and implement the human resources master plan. We're technical people, so we have to talk about master plan. So we find, you know, somebody said our human resources are in fact our most valuable assets, and they walk out the door every night. But what this really means is this is not a catch-all, but this is the area where we would have succession planning and training and retention system, et cetera. So that's kind of, forgive the techie words, but that's what it's.
No, it's important.
It's a staffing plan.
Staffing.
That's what I call it.
But it's not really a
That's
staffing plan.
engineer for staffing.
That's engineer for staffing plan.
Yeah, but the succession piece is so critical, especially
Yes.
as I've seen it as part of East Bay Med where a lot of information is going on.
It just shares that with you. We have a lot of information going on. So a lot of retirees, a lot of people just leaving. There's natural attrition. They walk out. Not a huge wave, although that, you know, it always seems it's just like around the corner. We haven't experienced a huge wave. But what we begin to feel is that there's not so much a wave going out the door, as much as in this district, there's what I call concentration risk. We have a lot of people that are retirement eligible in certain pockets of the district. You know, our succession planning might, instead of focusing on sort of this general, you know, retirement way, really focus more laser-like on areas where we do that higher retention. Which, you know, I mean, probably the HR folks don't like to say this, but, you know, the calendar goes by for all of us, and we get, you know, day older and a month older every day going by. There's some areas where that's more prevalent than there are other areas in the district.
You know, you need to target those areas.
Yeah.
Those are critical
And I
ending-
personally see that.
ending losses.
You know, some of our trade people, 3 or 4 are going at a time. And you just watch it, 30 years, 35 years.
There has so much happen in the Bay Area in terms of innovation and growth in all the agencies. And now people are reaching that age of retirement. How can you go along with it?
But it's retaining the information.
Well, the only way you're going to do that is take their brain. I mean, I have this discussion so many times. Well, tell me what you know. Well, I don't know what I know. If you talk to me about a client, I can tell you their kid's name, when they were born, the dog, etc., when they bought the house. But I don't know that you don't know that. You're going to have to learn yourself. Sorry.
Well, there's techniques, you know, obviously there's overlap techniques.
The shadowing overlap.
Et cetera. None of which are free, there's price tag associated with them, but there are techniques.
Well, I think the chamber is a really good example of what can go wrong. Somebody there for 40 years, and then you hire someone with a resume that looks really good, and, he can't get out of a paper bag. And now they're suffering for it.
So anyways,
Yeah,
good.
good.
Now we'll start using this to develop the budget. This is not, we're not saying to the board, this is not adoption, we're saying that we go back to the budget, oh, you can't change this because you told us this before. You realize that you don't know the cost of these, so we start developing the budget, we may have honors and remorse on some of these, that's a fair discussion. Thank you. That'll help us move into the next phase of this.
Third question. Okay, moving along. Item 10, board member items, submittal of written report of travel and training. Rich.
No reports, just a quick one for the upcoming realignment.
So that's going to
All right. asked me to do that, and it's what I think everyone will get done. So it's the 13th of March, 6 p.m. at Shannon Center. The one piece of information is if we can form 8 people, so everybody's part of the conference, if we get 8 of us, we get a table, who's going to let you want, and we get our name on there, we'll decorate it, we get a lot of, let you want. So if 8 of us want to throw in, that'd be nice. And if Q and I are going,
Greg and I are going.
so that's halfway there.
We've got some schedule stuff we're trying to work on. So it's about to-
So,
Okay.
no pressure of, as much as Mr. Brown, as much as Mr. Brown allows, just email me if you plan on going and you want to, you can bring it on the table, I'll get the names of the right people and we'll.
Purely social.
Purely social,
Okay.
okay.
Social ceremony. Because they're trying to get a count right now for
Yeah,
the.
well, no, and I was thinking, it'd be kind of fun to get like powder fountain or something, something water thing on our table, nice decoration. They let the sponsor table decorate things, so everyone can do it. All right, that's all I have.
Get a chocolate
Don't
fountain.
fuck with that one.
Yeah, we'll bring some.
Oh.
With flowers, that's a great idea.
Recycle water sculpture, all right, that's all I have.
Well, I have 2 things. I already spoke about Derwa and where we're going with that. The other thing is that Mr. Haggerty actually hosted a forum along with the Bay Area Council on this book, Tri-Valley Rising. And all of the people that spoke were from different areas of the economy. And they continually talked about how we're just perched in the perfect position for all 5 cities to grow and develop what's going on. But we have a couple of things against us. One is the housing market, and 2 is the traffic and the problem that the traffic is. After the meeting was over, I didn't want to embarrass Mr. Haggerty, so after the meeting was over, I went up to him and I said, you forgot one critical thing that's going to kill the economy if we can't solve it, and that is the lack of water. No business wants to come here if there's no water. You know how he can get flippant sometimes, and he said, well, that's your problem, you're a special district, I don't deal with that. It's like, okay, whatever. But the statistical information that they put together about the Tri-Valley and how much we all mean to each other economically is really fascinating. So I was able to get a whole bunch of books. If anybody wants one, they can have them. Other than that, I don't have anything else.
We attended Lavna last night, so that was a good meeting. Some housekeeping items and a couple issues coming up down the line, but things look good.
I have one other thing. Ed, if you would be so kind, some of you know I'm with this cold leaving for Hawaii tomorrow morning. And so I will miss the dinner Saturday night. Please let the employees know how much I appreciate what they do. And I'm very sorry to be missing this, but this is sort of an opportunity of a lifetime to go to Ayulani with my grandchildren and son and daughter-in-law, so.
During tax season.
I know. This is the first time in 41 years I have taken a vacation during tax time.
Exactly.
Very good.
Very good.
You're gonna have so much fun you can go here.
I hope so. I'll burn it out.
We'll make sure to.
And
Thank
we
you.
look forward to, I look forward to that. Event this weekend.
Don, you have anything else?
I'm done.
I attended the Casa Aqua BAB2E conference, lobbying conference in Washington, D.C. So I've given you all a copy of my report, but I'll just touch on a couple of highlights. First of all, I've never been so damn cold in my whole life. We had 12-degree weather on Monday when I flew in, 8-degree weather on Wednesday, snow on Thursday, 2 degrees below, I think, on Wednesday night. It was cold.
Director Duarte, I heard from one of the lobbyists I was in, if you get the trooper award, I think one day they promised you, somebody wrote it down there, they said they were with you 5.5 miles.
Yep. Well, I want to personally thank and acknowledge Steve Delight, because he was my shepherd indeed. He would purposely hang back as the delegation would walk along. I said, wait for the old man. He took care of me, but yeah, he had his little, his thing on the iPhone. He tracked 5 miles on that one day.
In the snow.
No, not in the snow, just walking on those hard granite floors. The purpose of the conference, of course, is to, for the organization's delegates to buttonhole our elected representatives. So we covered, as CASA, Western Recycled Water Association, and business, Bay Area Business to Energy, BAB2E coalitions. We split up into teams and were assigned a certain group of legislators to those, both in the House of Representatives and the Senate. I think one of the things I came away with is, if you recall, right after I was elected, I was picked to go to this same conference 2 years ago. And you'll see in my report that it's kind of discouraging sometimes when you see how slow government moves and what it takes to get affect any changes in legislation and or regulations. But that is the way the game is played, and I know that Gary Darling from Diablo said that he'd been going there 7 years, and we're still out there with the BAB2E goal that we want. In our presentations on CASA on Tuesday, for consideration of having elected representatives join the Congressional Clean Water Technology and Innovation Caucus, refocus existing federal grant programs to support other options, such as water recycling, biosolids, and other recovery opportunities, passed the W21 legislation, that's Senate Bill 176 and HR 291, to provide federal support for water recycling infrastructure construction. The second point that we presented to our elected officials, reform of the Clean Water Act regarding citizen suits. We talked about this 2 years ago, and then we still have some predatory attorneys that are out there that are suing districts because of the reporting of any sewage spills, which is mandated that it goes into a database, and there is zero tolerance. So once it's reported, and the fact that there's zero tolerance, the Act provides that any citizen can initiate a lawsuit. And one such attorney, they tell me, is up in the hundreds of thousands of dollars in settlements that they've extracted from local agencies right here around the base. And we also want the Clean Water Act to provide a longer term for the state and federal agencies to initiate enforcement action and allow the agency to respond and come into compliance rather than the 60 days. 60 days to comply is just no time at all. Continued support for funding and financing through a combination of the state revolving fund and other financing options, such as tax-exempt muni bonds. Regulatory reform in 2 key areas. Again, we talked about this 2 years ago. Extend our permit terms for the NPDES to 10 years, and revise Section 304 to eliminate the current wording on conflict of interest. I don't know if I mentioned this 2 years ago, but it's becoming a problem in any openings that come up on these elected boards or appointed boards for water agencies, that a person like Bert, if he were to retire with all that knowledge and expertise that he could take to a particular board, he would not be allowed to be appointed to that board because of a 10% limitation on income from any permit holder. And there's a simple way to handle that, and it's talked about in the handout. I'll provide you another handout. Wednesday, we went with the Western Recycled Water Association and did the same thing. And we visited Eric Swalwell, Denham, Longwood, Napolitano, Costa, Ernie, Nunes, Miller, and Garamendi. That morning, I was privileged to introduce Eric to the rest of the delegation, and he spoke on he serves on the Committee for Homeland Security, and he spoke about well, the main focus was on cyber threats from international hackers and local hackers. So yes, it is a problem that everyone is well aware of. On the Bay Area Biosolids Energy Coalition, on Wednesday at 4 o'clock, we went over to the Department of Energy and met with the director there, Jonathan Mail, brilliant PhD in physics. And for those of you who are not aware, with BAB2E, we are getting, the 19 agencies are close to getting a agreement with a private R&D firm that is, and actually a manufacturer, that is going to build a biosolids to energy conversion plant. And it's, again, the handout will explain the scientific principle behind it. But it was interesting in our meeting with this gentleman from DOE that as of our result of our efforts 2 years ago, they got a letter signed by, I think, 9 elected representatives telling DOE you need to address and consider biosolid conversion. And as of today, they still have not. So the emphasis here was to try to talk him into it, and we got a kind of a polite, we'll think about it, we'll consider it, you should consider contacting this agency and that agency. But we got a lot of support from the representatives. We met with the Saulnier's office, Thompson, Senator Mikulski from Maryland, McNerney, Eshoo, and we also met with Doug Clapp, who's the clerk for the Subcommittee on Energy and Water Development Committee on Appropriations. So I think a stronger letter and some muscle is going to be applied to at maybe the Senate level, or the Speaker level, but they're going to try to convince DOE that they need to appropriate money for our type of project. And we focus on the fact that the Bay Area Coalition, we're ready to go. And in terms of government funding, $25 million is a drop in the bucket. So we're hoping that we'll get some traction on that. Like I say, I flew in Monday, 3 days of walking those corridors. And again, I'll repeat what I said 2 years ago. It's just astounding how young the staffers are for our elected officials.
And you hope that they at least have a bachelor's degree and...
And most of them do.
Most of them have
Most of them do.
policy.
And it's certainly an equal opportunity environment for young ladies. Because many of the chief aides were young women. Very, very smart, very sharp. I would urge any of you, if you ever have the chance to go and participate, it's a lot of walking, it's a lot of talking, but that's what gets results, and it's an educational process that you won't forget. That's the thing in marketplace.
And the DOE, we actually went and visited, we did DOE as well last year. And it's like they just need, the more
Here's a
we are in
couple
front
of
of them, the
the
better.
folders that you're welcome to look at. I'd like them back, and I'm going to have copies made, and we'll get copies to all of you on that.
Did you guys meet with any of the senators?
Yeah, our team did. The other teams did. Okay. Any other? At this time, we'll go into closed session. The board will be going into closed session for one closed session listed on the agenda. Conflict of labor negotiators pursuant to Government Code 54957.6. Agency negotiators, Burton Kelchik, Michelle Gallardo, and employee organization is the Mid-Management Employee Bargaining Association.
Additional attendees as set forth on the agenda.
Yes. Keep your best dog party voice.